Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good morning to you. My name is Sid Snitkin, and I'm the moderator for this session, which is on asset information management, and with a subtitle, I guess you'd call it Integrating Design and Operations Information, which is something we're going to be trying to do in this session today. The way I want to manage this session, what should I aim at? It's not working. I am just hitting the forward. If any one of you have been to ARC forums before, you'll know that we have a problem with clicking. I'm sure I'm hitting it. It could just be me, I mean, because it is a recurring problem, but I'm the one that knows it. So it could very well be. I apologize for that. Well, but then what do we do? Here, do you want this? Excuse me. Anyhow, the way I would like to, I plan, not like to, but plan to run the session is first, I'm going to give a little introduction, and the idea of that is to kind of frame the issue and say what is asset information management and why is there an issue there? What's the issue that we want to talk about? Or why do we see this as something important at ARC? We do a lot of research on that at ARC and have over the years. Then we're going to have two speakers today. The first one will be Keith Campbell from Chevron, and the second one will be Cliff Peterson. I was worried for a moment it was misspelled, but it's spelled correctly. Who's from Northwest Redwater Partnership. And I may have misrepresented some, we shall see, but I think Keith's going to be coming more from a project perspective. Cliff is going to be coming more from an operational perspective, which is what we were hoping to get in this session. And then we're going to have a panel discussion where Max Taylor will join us and Alan Johnston will join us. And I apologize, I don't have Alan's name on this. Alan agreed to join as I don't want to say, not as in the late period, so it's my fault for not having his name. Alan is the president of Mimosa, so for those who don't know him. So anyhow, and then the idea of that is that you can ask them what to do. All right. Could you advance the slide? Thank you, Scott. So what's asset information management? I have a couple slides here. I just plan to speak very quickly. To begin with, you have to say what's asset lifecycle management in order to understand what asset information is. And we have a model that we use at ARC we've developed over the years. The one at the top is kind of the traditional view of asset lifecycle management. At least I say that. The one at the bottom is ARC's view of asset lifecycle management, which is more recognizing that these are ongoing, continuous business processes. There's companies who build plants, and make modifications, and there's groups that manage that, the project people. There are people who operate the plants, and they continue to operate the plants and make modifications and so on. And they're constantly interacting with upgrades and things like that, and there's this information flow and coordination that has to go on. Could you go to the next slide, Scott? And with respect to information, the one thing we have found, and I think everybody will find is that all of these processes are extremely information dependent. They're driven by information. And you really need to have good information systems both to manage the project phase, and there's different issues in projects than there are in assets. You need good information management systems during the asset phase. We also have one in there for portfolio management, but that's kind of a small item, I would say. And a big issue is that the information flows, as I mentioned, in that circle, and it's constantly being exchanged, which means you have to make sure you collect the data good ways, you manage the data, you manage change and things like that. Next slide. Now, what do we mean by asset information? This is a slide we've been using at ARC for quite a while now. But one thing we have found is a lot of times people, when I say that, they'll think, oh, you're just talking about the engineering drawings, and someone else will mean, oh, you're talking about the data I collect during operations. Well, the answer is yes, that's all of that. But the one thing we have found is it's a massive amount of information, a very wide range of information, tremendous volumes of information, and you have functional information, you have information about the design of the assets and the equipment, you have procedural information, commercial information, historical information, status information. All of that is important. The point that I always try to make is each of those is important, and you can't ignore any of them. Some people try to attack the problem with just one issue, but those are all important, they're all interrelated. Another thing is, and the information on the left we call reference information because it's information that relates to the assets, is very subject to change management. If the asset changes, you have to change it. Information on the right is more transactional information, and there's issues there around managing records and so on. The information to the left is mostly what I would call documents, including drawings and things as documents today, even though they're not schematics. I mean, they're not drawings anymore. And the other stuff on the right is mostly data. And you need management systems for all of that. Now, next slide, please. Now, what's the issue? That's the challenge in a sense. That's what we mean by asset information, and asset information management is managing all that information. But the real challenge we see, we've done a lot on studies in this area, and there's two areas. From a project perspective, there's a lot of work done by NIST, and there's a very famous NIST study. It was actually quite a while ago. The sad thing I would say, though, is the world's still like that, I believe. It did an assessment a good 10 years ago, but the world's still in that situation. And their studies show that during the capital project phase, that about 4.3% of CapEx is lost due to poor interoperability, which I'm calling poor information management. If you dig through all those numbers, which is what I did in that chart, you'll find out that 2.8% of that hits the owner-operator directly. So for every project you're building, every time you're building something, whether it's a new greenfield or an upgrade, a major upgrade, you're wasting almost 3% of CapEx purely because you don't have good information management. I'll redefine that term, okay? But that's the idea. Can you go to the next slide? Now, if you talk about operations of assets, and the first thing was 3% of CapEx, and it's on every project. Now, if you shift to operations, this is some analysis we did internally, which I'm told when I showed to people is very conservative. But we ended up finding that you lose the equivalent of about 1.5% of your sales revenues. Now, I'm not saying you lose your sales revenues. I'm saying the loss you incur, it could be from inefficiencies and things like that, are comparable to 1.5% of what the sales revenues might be for a facility. And they're lost through lower availability, operating delays, higher CapEx costs for modifications, through higher maintenance costs. And higher maintenance is not just sometimes people think that's the only issue. That's actually a small part of it. When you add all those together, you get about 1.5% losses, plus there's a big environmental health and safety risk, an enormous risk that a lot of people ignore. And the key point of that is that's lost every year, year after year after year after year. And the point I try to make at the bottom of that slide is sometimes when I say 1.5%, people say, okay, you can't be perfect. But they don't realize that for a lot of the organizations in this room probably, that's tens of millions of dollars a year. We're not talking just small money here. We're talking big money. So next slide, please. So what does somebody have to do to manage information? At ARC, we've also done a lot. I'm just telling you I'm not trying to frame, I'm just framing the issues. There's two kinds of issues that we have identified that need to be managed. One thing is information quality. And by that, I mean that the information you have is complete, and it's accurate, it's timely. Consistency is a big issue that comes up a lot. And I would throw in there security today, that it's secure. The other aspect of information management is usability. So the first thing is making sure the information is good, and then you're making sure that people can use it. And usability involves like being able to access it, being able to understand it. A key thing is being able to use it for something, so it's actionable. And then easily shared is another thing I would say that's very important these days. And it all makes the information trustworthy, and you get your real benefits when people trust the information and use the information and make decisions and don't waste time checking it and things. Next slide. We've also found that one of the issues with asset information is who does that impact? It impacts everybody. On this slide, I just show certain stakeholders, like operating people, contractors, engineering, and management. There's a much bigger group than that, but that's just a spattering of them. But the one thing we have also found is if you take the issue and study it, you will find there's kind of two use cases that dominate the solutions that you need and the way you have to address it. The one on the left, which is the engineering, so we would call it asset information management for engineering, and on the right, operations. They have two different issues, and actually one's kind of more data-centric, one is more, I don't want to say, well, I say that, but no, they both need both, but it's what they do with it and how they use it and things like that. So there's two different use cases. And can you go to the next slide? And this, I just want to summarize, this is our model ARC for asset information management. And what it is something I use when I talk to people about what type of solutions they need. And what you'll find is there's probably no answer complete to that problem today. There's too many issues. So people have to build portfolios. But the issues you have to address is you have to address at the bottom the content management, the quality issues, making sure you manage information properly. And one side is kind of the content or documents, the other side is the data. At the top, you have to make sure you have work environments so that people can access it and use it. On the right, for example, that might be analytics tools. I happen to be a big promoter of analytics as well. But something you can use to actually make sense out of that information. And in the middle, the one thing that's really emerging that's very important is context management. One thing is managing the good quality of the content, but in this world and with asset information management, a very important issue is connectivity of that information, being able to navigate it, being able to find it, having all these relationships and knowing what the information meant in context. So context management, and we're finding it's actually a separate challenge. It's might be built in some solutions, but generally they don't cover it completely.